Welcome to meeting number 8 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Today's meeting is taking place in the hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using a Zoom application. Before we continue, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio feedback incidents and protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members before we start. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, or ask by an MP directly, if an MP directs a question to you. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation on the floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired language. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order to the best of our ability, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Before we start, there are a couple of things that I'd like to move to the end of the meeting, but we do need to approve a budget. And there was a second piece. What was the second piece? Okay, so we'll just, I need a little bit of time at the end for the budget, so I'll try to reserve 5 to 10 minutes at the end. But today, pursuant to Standing Orders 108 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the committee is commencing a study and update on the implementation of the Grocery Code of Conduct. I'd like to welcome our witness. Today with us is Karen Proud, Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct. Welcome to our committee. And as you know, 5 minutes for comments, and then we'll open it up for questions. Welcome to the committee.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Karen Proud, and I am the President and Adjudicator of the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to provide an update on the implementation of the code. The office was established toward the end of March 2025 to administer the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct, a framework designed to strengthen trust, transparency, and fairness across Canada's grocery supply chain. In the few months since, our small team has focused on building the foundations needed to bring that commitment to life. I'm pleased to report that we are fully operational with a permanent office, communications platform, and member portal. We've also seen strong engagement across the sector. To date, nearly 100 companies have joined as members, representing every part of the supply chain. Since our establishment, I have participated in over 39 stakeholder meetings and 28 industry events nationwide to raise awareness of the code, answer questions, and help companies prepare for compliance. These meetings have been in addition to our educational outreach through the monthly newsletters, published guidance materials, and our recent webinar. The enthusiasm and support from across the industry have been encouraging. Our number one priority right now is to finalize the Dispute Resolution Management Process, or DRMP. This is the last major piece that we need before the code can be fully implemented on January 1st, 2026, and before we can begin our formal membership recruitment campaign.
L'élaboration de PGR.
Developing the DRMP has been a challenging but necessary process. We are creating from scratch a fair and accessible mechanism for resolving disputes within the constraints of a voluntary, non-regulated framework.
There are real limitations on what a self-governing office like ours can require of members, and the process must also remain fully consistent with the provisions of the code itself, which was developed and agreed to by industry. Balancing these realities while ensuring that the dispute resolution management process is still credible, practical, accessible, and trusted by all has taken some time. But we are close. I believe we now have the tools needed to move forward. They may not be perfect. A few things are at the outset, but they are a solid foundation from which to start, and I am confident they will strengthen over time as we gain experience. As adjudicator, I am committed to monitoring how the code functions in practice and to reporting back honestly and transparently on what is working well and where adjustments may be needed. Continuous improvement will be a defining feature of this office. In the coming months, our focus will be on finalizing dispute resolution, launching formal recruitment, expanding our education and outreach efforts, and preparing for the full implementation of the code at the start of 2026. Mr. Chair, I want to thank this committee for its ongoing attention to the Grocery Code of Conduct. For a voluntary framework like ours, the continued interest and oversight of Parliament is critical. It helps sustain momentum and reinforces that accountability and fairness in the grocery sector remain a national priority. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the vital funding that we are receiving through the Regional Collaborative Partnership Program under the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, which is an agreement between federal, provincial, and territorial governments. The funding has supported our first year in our launch, and our goal is to be fully funded through our membership by 2027. But certainly at this stage, we would not be operational were it not for the support from government partners. I thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Je vais répondre aux questions en anglais.
I will answer the questions in English because I am not totally bilingual, and it is very important for me to be precise in my answers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go to the Conservatives for 6 minutes. Mr. Epp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Proud, for appearing today. I think I'll start with what the code is to do and what it is not to do. And I'm asking if you could expand on that. I'm going to read you a quote here. It's important to recognize the distinction between contract law in Canada and the voluntary code. Can you draw that out a bit? What's the difference between contract law and a voluntary code?
So the code as designed is voluntary, so it's the choice of members to join. The issue between the code and contract law is we have been clear from the beginning that in our office, we cannot supersede existing laws, whether it's contract law, whether it's other laws of the land. So if two parties enter into a contract and come to an agreement together for that contract, the office cannot interfere in that contract. If that contract contravenes the code, we are able to hear complaints related to that, but I don't have any authority to nullify or change contracts entered into between parties.
Is the inverse true? Is a contravention of the contract then by automatically a breach of the code?
No. I mean, contracts generally deal with supply agreements, and certainly in our case, it's supply agreements between suppliers and their retailers. And so contravention of contracts falls into contract law. And we are not an appeals mechanism for where there are conflicts within that contract. That falls to contract law, and there's processes that deal with that. Should there be something in the contract, and there's a section in our Code of Conduct, Section 2.5, that says, you can't contract out of the code. And so if you put things in your contract that are contrary to the code, that allows people who are party to the code to complain to our office, and we will hear those complaints.
Okay, one of the drivers, or my understanding of one of the drivers that's led to the entire value chain being at this place, is the existence or alleged existence of intimidation in the code. How does the code begin to address intimidation between various players in the chain? And, and if I can just expand on that, one assumes immediately that's retailer intimidation upon suppliers, but the inverse, as we've heard in testimony a couple of years ago, can also be true.
So the code very specifically has a provision that prevents or that speaks to the fact that it's a contravention of the code if there are sort of intimidation or other factors against a supplier or a retailer for exercising their rights under the code. So again, if that sort of thing arises, people can make complaints to the office, and the office will look into that. People can make formal complaints through our dispute resolution process. The office will look into that and come to a finding.
If the fear is intimidation, is there the reality of reprisal just by making a complaint? How does one address that?
That's a really good question, and it is something that I receive frequently, especially as I'm talking to smaller grocers or smaller suppliers. So within our system, we have the formal dispute resolution process that we're still finalizing, and that's where the party complains. There's visibility between the parties about that complaint. It goes through a process that may eventually lead to an adjudication decision and a publication of a compliance issue. We have another process very similar to what they've put in place in the United Kingdom, where we have created a portal where any one of our members can make a complaint to the office. That's a confidential complaint. We take in that information to see whether this may be something of concern with regards to a code violation, and we can follow up on that complaint without breaching any confidentiality. Our main role is really to try and address these things before they become formal complaints. So there's absolutely a mechanism that anyone can complain to us, and we will follow up and try and work that out with the other player. There's also a third component where anyone can go and talk to their industry trade association, who can then bring to the office issues that are of a sort of systemic nature, where a number of members are having the same problem. They can do the same, come to the office, raise those issues with us, and we will do our analysis and determine whether we need to follow up to try and correct the issue before it becomes a formal complaint.
I think you just answered my next question, and that is, what tools do you have? So you just listed 3. Are there any others? And I'll ask that.
So those are the processes we have in place that allow anyone to come and make complaints. Our tool that the office has, so we are limited because we're not a regulated industry. We're not legislated. I can't fine people. I can't investigate things. I can't compel evidence. But the majority of my role is really trying to work with the other parties to point out where I think there may be code-related issues, because ultimately the stick we have is the fact that we can publish public reports. And so through the formal process, that's a notice of noncompliance potentially, but I can also publish reports and intend to publish reports on a regular basis about what's going on.
One more quick question in. Just if you were to uncover criminality in that process, are you allowed to report it to the relevant authorities?
That would be something I'd have to discuss with our internal legal counsel. So I'm not able to respond to you at this stage, but if I were aware of something criminal behavior coming up, I would consult with our legal counsel as to my duty and responsibility to report that.
Thank you, Mr.
Rules for 6 minutes. MP Dendran.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. I will give you the time to put on your earpiece while I thank you for coming here today. Thank you as well for the work that you're doing for the Code of Conduct. From what I've understood, we've had a code since June, and that's final. We're now working on the dispute resolution process. You are saying that there are certain things that need to be finalized. What is left for us to finalize the process of arbitration, and are you confident that we will finish that process by January?
Yeah, so the code itself was agreed upon by all parties last year. There was a coming into force date that was put in the code, which was the June date, and we've been taking sort of a transitional approach to that. As mentioned, we are working on this final governance piece, which is dispute resolution. You have to keep in mind that it took almost 4 years for people to draft the code and come to agreement on the language within the code. We've only been working on dispute resolution for about 6 months. I think we're very close. We've been going through drafts with an industry working group and within our board. There is just language and questions as to whether it covers everything it needs to. We've got what I feel is a very, very good draft, and it's just a matter of getting the next and hopefully final round of comments back from both the working group that's been working on it as well as our board of directors. At this stage, I still feel that we can have that finalized before the 1st of January.
C'est une excellente nouvelle pour l'ensemble des parties.
That's great news for all parties involved. We've had some discussions ongoing over the last few months. Do you think that there might be a high number of complaints that will come your way?
That's a good question. We don't know off the bat how people are going to interact with the office. As I had mentioned, I have spent a lot of the last 6 months going around talking to different sectors, presenting at conferences, talking to individuals one-on-one, trying to raise awareness of the code and the importance. I always leave, in every conference, I tell people, if I leave you with nothing else, my message is to please work with the office. We know from the experience in the UK, there was a lot of reluctance to engage the office at first because of the concerns around confidentiality and the potential, if somebody brings a complaint to us, that it's going to get found out and there might be some reprisal. I think it's going to take some time as we start to work with different groups for them to feel that they can bring complaints to us, that we are going to pay attention to them, and that their confidentiality will be respected. We are prepared if we get a lot of complaints. We have a good system in place, but I suspect we're going to see more of a trickling in than an avalanche.
Je pense particulièrement aux PME du...
I have the SMEs in mind, you know, the producers that work with major retailers. They are more vulnerable than others, and one of the things that the Code of Conduct wants to address is to find a balance between these different parties. Can you give a voice to the associations who represent SMEs? Was that considered in the dispute resolution process?
So the associations have a really important role to play with the office, both in providing us with a picture of what's going on generally in the sector and to identify those systemic issues where a number of their members or their entire membership may be affected. And it's very important for us that we continue that dialogue with the associations. It's also important as we get information through other means that we're able to check in with the associations to see, is this really a systemic issue? Is it a one-off thing? Can I get a little more understanding? Where the association role doesn't come into play is with the formal dispute resolution process. This is where one party will bring an issue against another party. That has to be an individual business-to-business case because of the nature of those complaints. The individual agreements may be different. The circumstances may be different. We are not set up with this code to do what I would say like a class action complaint to us. It really is individual complaints to allow the other party to respond specifically to the information. The associations can help their members in that process and can help provide information on how to navigate. But for the specific formal dispute, the associations don't represent their members in that process.
Je sais pas s'il me reste du temps.
Do I have any time? Do I have time left?
Je vais les laisser à mon collègue, M. Perron.
I will cede my time to my colleague, Mr. Perron.
Ça fait 6 minutes 18, c'est fun.
Oui.
Bonjour, Madame Proud. Merci d'être.
Hello, Ms. Proud. Thank you for being with us today. and we know that you're busy, it's important that you take the time to answer our questions. I've been listening to your answers from the beginning. To my Conservative colleagues, you said that the associations can address systemic issues, which you repeated to Ms. Dandurand. You explained the more formal process. If I understood correctly, you said that when there is the dispute resolution, the associations can't participate. Is that what did I understand correctly?
Yes, they can't bring themselves a complaint in the formal process. That's reserved for an individual company.
The objective of the code from the get-go, well, actually, I really appreciate your responses and the clarity. The goal of the code is to fix an imbalance. An SME might have 7 or 8 employees, and they are selling to a huge corporate company that has market shares, for example, or rather that, dominates a share of the market. We talked about intimidation. That's just something that we're concerned about. When a big company has, lawyers on hand, and you're telling me that the SMEs, whether they are, fruit vegetable farmers that are SMEs, they can't have any representatives. Isn't that an imbalance there, isn't it? So it's kind of like if you were to go to court and one party had the right to a lawyer and the other didn't.
And I think that's a very good question. So what I'm saying is that an association can't bring a complaint. Their member could bring a complaint, but they can bring representation within that formal dispute resolution process. We have also designed the system so that it is not cost prohibitive to a smaller organization. So for instance, as part of the formal dispute resolution process, we offer mediation as a first step. That's paid for by the office so that everybody has an opportunity to take part in that. We also offer a much sort of more expedient process through a dispute resolution where I would hear one hearing, where we are trying to make it as simple as possible through easy forms to fill out. We are not looking for legal briefs to be submitted to the office that we could then judge. It is not a court of law. It's an administrative process. And we're trying to design it as such to be simple and easy to use. When it comes to representation, as I said, the associations can't launch a complaint, but they can certainly help their members.
OK.
Your answer reassures me. So the associations can come support one of their SME members, and they can ask for counsel. That's a good thing. You talk about systemic issues. You say that the associations cannot file complaints formally. Earlier, however, you said that they can bring forth systemic issues. What is the difference, and what would prevent an association who has 10 to 15 members who all share the same issue from bringing that complaint to you?
There's nothing that stops them from that. So there's, as I mentioned, there's the formal process, and then there's the sort of complaints-based process where I am counting on associations to bring systemic issues to the office. And I really see 90% of our job, I believe strongly, is not going to be in a formal dispute setting at all. It really is going to be, and this is how the experience has gone in the UK, it really is going to be where people raise issues through our confidential portal, through the associations who bring systemic issues to us. We look at that, and if we feel that there's concerns with the code, we will follow up with the other party to try and get that issue solved before it gets to anything formal. I really feel that that's likely to be 90% of my job, and my adjudicator hat is maybe going to be put on, 1 to 2% of the total time. It really is that role of the office plays as a facilitator, as an educator, as a mediator almost between the parties to get those issues solved before they become formal disputes.
Je comprends bien l'intention de médiation, puis je salue ça. Là, je pense que
I understand the intention behind the mediation, and I salute that because I think that it'll fix some issues. Can you guarantee that a small supplier will actually dare file a complaint? You say that the process is confidential, but when there has to be some sort of representation when the process goes forth, they'll have to be identified. How can you guarantee that there won't be any reprisal 2-3 months later? Oh, we've found another supplier. We can't renew your contract, for example. And sub-question, if that happened, what can the code do to protect this SME?
So in the formal process, there will be visibility between the two parties. There has to be, because somebody files a complaint, the other party has the right to know what that complaint is about. The agreements may be different. There has to be that discussion. In the confidential, where they're reporting to us, where we may then later follow up, that is all confidential. That information will never be released. When it comes to the formal process, if anyone brings forward a case, again, within the code, it clearly states that it's a violation of the code for there to be repercussions for somebody exercising their rights under the code. And
There. Next, I'm going to go to the Conservatives for 5 minutes. John?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ms. Proud, for coming here today and being so detailed in your answers, which is nice to see. But you were saying that the one aspect of the grocery code that hasn't been completed is the dispute mechanism. And my understanding is a number of the large retailers have not signed on to that. Are you able to tell us which retailers have not signed on, and have they given you reasons as to why they have not signed on?
So our list of members is public on our website, so you can go through there. You can see all 96 that we have as of today. We have Empire, who joined right at the beginning. We also have Save On Foods, who, while independent, is also a very large retailer. Those are the only two large that have signed on so far. The others are waiting to see what the final governance pieces look like. And frankly, I don't blame them for that. They want to see exactly how the process is going to work. They want to feel comfortable with where we've landed when it comes to the reach and authority of the adjudicator. And so they have been working very closely with us in a working group. We have an industry working group that's been helping us work through finalizing the dispute resolution mechanism. They've all been very involved. My expectation is when we finalize that, I expect them all to sign on, and at this stage I don't have an indication from any of them that they're not planning to.
Okay, just so we're clear, I want to, for those who may be watching, three of the largest of those 5 retailers that we talked about during our studies previously, Loblaws, Walmart, and Costco are amongst those that have not signed on to the dispute mechanism, correct?
We haven't finalized dispute resolution.
Well,
they haven't
agreed to be a part of it until they see the final.
They want to see the final document, yes.
Now, you've mentioned a number of times that this is a voluntary code, and some of this has been modeled after the United Kingdom's template. However, the United Kingdom also started out voluntary and had to go mandatory. Because obviously it wasn't achieving what its set out goals were. What has to happen in this grocery code of conduct for it to remain voluntary?
That's a great question. Not only did the UK not succeed in voluntary, nor did Australia. They've both gone to a regulated system, although quite different. A number of things have to happen. One is I need to have all of the major grocers and all of the major suppliers sign on to the grocery code. That is sort of the first step through the door if this voluntary approach is going to work. We also need to see that as the office starts working with those entities when there are issues related to the code, that we are being listened to, that people are being collaborative, that they really are committing to this voluntary code. I will be incredibly open and transparent in my reporting if the office feels that the code is not working. We intend fully to do similar to what they do in the UK. It's not going to be Karen Proud's decision as to whether the code is working or not. It is going to be our members in the sectors who we will be surveying and hearing from them whether they're seeing the changes similar to what they've seen in the UK and things progressing as we hope. If we are not, then I will report on the results of that, and we'll have to see what the next steps for this country have to be.
Thank you for that. And I have time for one last question. And we studied food pricing and food inflation a couple of times in the previous parliament. And the then Minister of Industry, now the Finance Minister, was quite adamant that the Grocery Code of Conduct was going to be the salve for food inflation and grocery prices. Is there anything in the code that stipulates that grocery prices will come down once the code is officially initiated and the grocery chains have signed on? Is there any guarantees that grocery prices will come down as a result of the Grocery Code of Conduct?
I don't expect the Grocery Code of Conduct to affect food inflation or the price of food. The Grocery Code was never designed as such. In fact, one area where the code does not come into play is with regards to price negotiations between retailers and suppliers. There are some out there who have made comments that it could raise prices. Other academics have talked about how it could lower prices if things are more efficient. But the code itself was never meant to address the price of food or food inflation.
Well, that's an interesting answer, despite the claims of the previous Liberal minister and now the Finance Minister that the Grocery Code was going to be the magic bullet to address food prices. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to MP Chatel for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Proud, for being here today. The Grocery Store Code of Conduct is so important for Canadians. They've been waiting for it. And they also expect there to be a good relationship between wholesalers and the major industry grocers. You're saying today that you're optimistic on the negotiations regarding the dispute resolution process, and you are saying that the Grocery Store Code of Conduct is just missing one aspect of the dispute resolution, but we expect there to be a code of conduct by January, correct?
It's still my hope and my expectation that we can finalize the dispute resolution mechanism before the 1st of January.
Donc, dans ce point-là, Madame Proud, j'ai l'impression...
On that, I get the impression that the negotiations between stakeholders on the dispute resolution process are, on the one hand, well, some might want to use this process in order to extend the powers of the Grocery Code of Conduct, and others would like to limit its role. Is your role to help the parties find common ground, respect the spirit of the code, and go forward with the code?
I mean, it's, as mentioned, the code took over 3 years. Every word in the code was scrutinized by all of the players. Dispute resolution is not different in that I think there's a lot of people around the table who have a lot of stake in this, a lot of opinions on what the dispute resolution can or cannot do. We are following what the code allows us to do and what a voluntary organization could possibly do. I don't think we're that far apart on dispute resolution on most issues. There's some concern in particular that have been raised that some parties want to just make sure that nobody can contract out of the code. That's sort of the biggest issue that we've been looking at. I think there are provisions in the code that clearly say you can't contract out of the code. It's just how we reflect that in the dispute resolution manual, which we're pulling together, has been sort of at most question. But we continue to move forward. There was things that happened months ago where we were fighting over other issues, and we've come to agreements on those. So I feel confident. There's so much at stake that I think people just want to really get it right, and there's a lot of passion around this. And I still feel confident that we will have a dispute resolution mechanism that people can agree to. Frankly, I don't think anyone is going to be 100% happy with what we end up with. Maybe that's the magic sauce, that if everyone feels that they've lost something, we've got something that we can move forward with. And ultimately, if there are problems, the office is committed to looking at this over time and reporting on where we need to fix things. So we expect even the code itself will likely be amended a year from now, dispute resolution as well, because I doubt that we're going to have it 100% right by January 1st.
C'est deux bons points que vous avez mentionnés.
You brought up two good points. A good agreement is when both parties are a little bit disappointed. Earlier, you mentioned that you had a stick in your hands and that your leverage was in your ability to write reports. So that's an interesting piece of leverage. You're saying, let's start with the code, let's find common ground and have an agreement, let's implement it, and then draft a report. If I understand correctly, you have 18 months after the implementation of the code to draft the report. And you're saying that you'll adjust afterwards as necessary, just as other countries who've implemented a code have done, correct?
So we, from a enforcement, and I say that lightly because we're not a regulated organization, but from an enforcement perspective, I really have one stick, and that is naming and shaming. And so in the formal dispute resolution process, if we come to a non-compliance, that will be published and it will be open to the public. From a reporting standpoint, the office can also write reports about what's working, what's not working, how things are going, the sorts of issues we're investigating, as well as what we're hearing from stakeholders. And so in the code, we are committed to reviewing the code.
Ms. Proud, I'm going to stop you there. I apologize. I'm going to go to the next person just so we can maintain. Mr. Perron, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
On to Mr. Perron. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Proud, I'm pretty optimistic, but I am concerned. Out of the major three players, they have not signed onto the code yet. They're waiting for the final draft. And we already saw that two of the major players did not want to sign till the very last minute. And after bringing them here, they did agree to sign on. What is preventing them from signing? From what I understand, it's just the dispute resolution process that needs finalizing. What is preventing them from signing? Have they made any specific requests with regards to the dispute resolution process?
So, I mean, I honestly think it's very fair that parties are waiting to see the full governance of exactly how we're going to deal with issues as they come up before they sign on to the code. I spent a lot of my career telling government that I can't support its policies until I saw all of the details. I think it's no different here, and you know the retailers that you're mentioning have been very much involved in helping draft the dispute resolution management process. As I mentioned, we have an industry working group. There are 3 retailers who currently sit on that, and they're helping us finalize.
Sorry, I don't have too much time. I'm pleased that they were active, but they should still be. Have they made any specific requests on the dispute resolution process while they wait to sign on?
So throughout the development of the process, we have been sort of negotiating and arguing about various points that have been in that management process. So just language that was in there. We talked about, at one point, there was mention of remedies, and it was raised that the office doesn't have the authority to require remedies. I mean, it's very technical things that we are I don't want to say arguing about, but debating, and that's what we're waiting to finalize before they will sign on. I fully expect, and I will report upon, when we're finished with dispute resolution, I expect everyone to sign on. There will be no more reason, once that is done, not to sign on.
Rien de spécifique qui les empêche.
But there's nothing specific that's holding them back right now, correct?
It's the language in dispute resolution and the drafting of how we phrase certain things within that manual on both sides.
Much. Now to the Conservatives for 5 minutes. Mr. Goy.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Proud. All of this is very interesting. I think we should remain optimistic, but we do have some concerns. You know, from farm to table, whether they're small or bigger farmers, and then, you know, they sell to a chain and they sell to local retailers and then on to consumers. I get the impression that making the code voluntary or, you know, imposing it I feel like there are some wholesalers and the chains that are going to test the code. Do you have any concerns about where there might be some gaps in the code that can, you know, be used? Or because I'm really convinced that these stakeholders are going to test the code, and are there any gaps that can be filled before that happens?
I don't think there's gaps that can be filled before it happens necessarily, but the code is principle-based, so it's not a lot of detail. As you read through the code, it's not a big document. It doesn't read like a regulation where everything is very specifically laid out, and so there are going to be elements of the code that are open to interpretation. Our office, at the end of the day, has the final say as to whether or not there was a code violation. I don't know at this stage whether the language in the code in every single instance is precise enough for it to work as expected. This is something that we're going to look at as we get complaints, whether the code language is strong enough, whether we need to change the code, even whether there are things within the code that need to be added because it doesn't help some of the constituents. So, you know, everyone is going to come at this with a different interpretation. I hear that already now, and we will really have to let it get going and get experience before we know whether there's loopholes or problems with how the code has been written.
Pensez-vous qu'on va pouvoir...
Do you think that we'll be able to help small farmers find, you know, some shelf space? Right now, a mid-size farmer can sell part of it, but, you know, to sell in a big chain requires a bigger company. And there's no more shelf space for small farmers. The chains have reserved shelf space for their products that are mass produced, and so local grocers don't have necessarily any space for small farmers, and it's a shame. Is that mentioned in the code?
So the code and the office, again, is very clear that we don't interfere in pricing decisions, and we don't interfere in what will still be very tough negotiations between small suppliers and large retailers. That's not where the code will interact to try and assist a small supplier in negotiating the sale of their products into those stores. What the code does do is provide some protections that when you have an agreement with a large retailer in this case, there are certain actions and certain behaviors that are not allowed under the code, and it provides for a means for those smaller suppliers to now have somewhere to go to address some of those issues, but we are not going to help small suppliers negotiate for space. That's not one of the purposes of the code. It does try as well to allow for a system of disputes when issues come up that is more fair and accessible to the smaller supplier who may not otherwise have had any opportunity to raise concerns about some of the practices that they've had to deal with. My hope is that by having a more open and transparent system where people are aware exactly as to what agreements they're entering into, that we can foster more innovation.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go to Mr. Connors.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming out today. This past week, back in my riding, I was speaking with Atlantic Grocery Distributors, owners of Powell's Supermarket, an independent grocer in rural Newfoundland. They actually supply most of Newfoundland with product, with grocery items, because the larger retailers are not in those areas. They're looking forward to the implementation of the Code of Conduct to help them compete with the larger retailers and promoting more fairness within the industry. Can you tell us a bit more about how this Code of Conduct will directly support independent small grocers like Atlantic Grocery in rural communities throughout the country?
Yeah, it's a very interesting and important aspect of the Canadian code versus the codes that you would find in Australia or in the UK, where our code is a reciprocal code. And so what I have heard as I've gone around talking to stakeholders, in particular from the independent grocers, is their concerns are more with regards to supply and their ability to get supply of product in a fair way. So I think we saw when COVID happened, it was very hard to find some products at the independent grocers. And this is where their main concern is when there's a supply constraint that they don't get cut out of the system and not get access to a reasonable supply. That is covered in the code, whereby when there are times of supply constraints, that those suppliers are supposed to be taking into account the needs of all of their customers, including the independents. And that's the issue I hear all the time from the independent grocers, is they welcome this code to be able to address that.
Thank you very much. My next question is about, like you mentioned, different countries that have a Code of Conduct. What have we done to look at what worked in those areas, what haven't worked in those areas, and how we have improved our Code of Conduct to sort of offset those, and if there's anything that we're missing?
So there have been many reports about the various systems, what worked, what didn't work, and so the office has educated ourselves about that. We've also made connections with the previous adjudicator in the UK and the current adjudicator in the UK, as well as the adjudicator in Australia, so that we can start to talk to them about what's working, what's not working. If they could do it all over again, where would they have started? Trying to just share that knowledge. It's an important part of the office's work is to collaborate with those other countries so that we can already be ahead of where they started.
And my last question is, like, as a consumer of the final product, like residents of Canada, constituents of Canada, why should I be concerned about the Code of Conduct and its implementation? And can we move ahead without having all the major parties signed on?
So we can move ahead, and this happened in Australia. It was a good example. They ended up going to a regulated code eventually, but one of the issues is one of the major wholesalers in Australia never joined the voluntary code. They still proceeded and still had positive outcomes in some areas with their code. I think we can do the same. Ultimately, we need to have everyone on board, but we can start. I think the code is very important for the industry and for the sector in getting a better business-to-business relationship, more transparency, because the outcome we hope to see is similar as to where the UK has gone, where when there's more certainty in your business relationship, there's more potential for investment, for innovation. That may not change the price of food you see on the shelf, but it does have benefits for the consumer in the end when there is innovation happening, when there's more potential for growth within the sector. I think if we see the same results that they've seen in the UK, this is very positive for just building a strong grocery sector in this country, which is so important for Canada and Canadians.
Well, thank you very much. You're done? Yep. Thank you very much. We will suspend, and we appreciate you taking time to be here with us today. This is important work, and I wish you all the best. So we'll suspend for 5 minutes. To finish a few minutes before our cutoff, just so we can do some housekeeping, I'd like to call the meeting back to order. Just a few comments before we do start. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the committee is resuming its study on the update implementation of the Grocery Code of Conduct. I'd like to welcome our witnesses here today. First, from the Association des Producteurs Marché du Québec, Patrice Lager-Bourgoin and Catherine Lefleuve, I hope I said that right, President, and Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada, Michael Graydon, Chief Executive Officer, and Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, Massimo Bergamini. You each have up to 5 minutes per association or group. And after the 5-minute presentation, we'll open it up to the members of Parliament, as you know. So welcome. And we'll start off with the Association des Producteurs Marché du Québec. Welcome. Bonjour.
Membres du comité, nous constatons actuellement plusieurs défaillances de marché.
We are currently seeing several market failures. Producers are having to deal with structural asymmetry. The 5 major chains account for nearly 80% of the food market. They have disproportionate bargaining power, which allows them to exert constant and harmful pressure on vegetable growers. I'll remind you that these producers are family businesses selling only perishable products, often with very short shelf lives. Vegetable growers are forced to accept prices and conditions without being able to discuss or even negotiate them. Even today, despite the years it took to establish the Code of Conduct, the problems commonly reported by vegetable producers persist. Retailers' insistence on devaluing production costs, thereby exerting constant downward pressure on prices to the detriment of producers' incomes. The lack of certainty and transparency regarding procurement policies, which prevents producers from making informed financial decisions, as well as questionable practices such as unauthorized deductions, late or allowances to discharge their goods at the chain, or late order cancellations, or even fines imposed for alleged violations that have not been proven with supporting evidence. The dynamics imposed by retailers are not sustainable over time. They allow large retailers to transfer costs, risk, and uncertainty to vegetable producers. This jeopardizes the long-term financial viability of vegetable farms. Since 2015, the net profits of vegetable farmers in Quebec has declined. Expenses have, of course, increased much faster than revenues over this period. With all this taken into account, the Grocery Store Code of Conduct is crucial. It is essential to start a movement that will not only correct this structural asymmetry, but to simply mitigate it. And even then, large chains will have to act in good faith by willingly agreeing to comply with the provisions of the code, but also with the dispute resolution process. As president, I will reiterate the importance of this code, which is essential. Patrice has told you about the harmful trends to producers. Allow me to share some real-life situations that occurred this summer. A producer called me crying. A large chain was threatening him with reprisal because he was unable to meet technical specifications due to the drought conditions in Quebec. The same major chain increased its administrative fees, and for some producers, it nearly doubled. I requested a meeting with them, which was refused under some vague pretext of an issue with the Competition Act. Just a few days ago, another large chain asked producers to guarantee volumes of and farm gate prices for the next 2 seasons, or 2 years, rather. This request actually does not make any sense because vegetable growers do not have assembly lines where they can assemble vegetables in closed circuit. We work with living things, and current geopolitical issues have a direct impact on the price of our inputs. Imposing such an approach condemns farms to take unreasonable financial risks. Oh, and I forgot to mention that in its request, that large chain asked the farmers to share highly confidential information, such as their turnover, the large chains, that specific chain's competitors with whom they do business. In its guidelines, it was stipulated that any form of communication with others, be they employees of that chain or anyone else, was forbidden. And if failing that, it could result in a negative evaluation of that company. Family-owned farmers and producers cannot operate in this toxic business climate. We do not take it for granted that the large chains will show a genuine interest in changing their ways, but this code, we know that it won't have enough teeth, but we don't think it should be light as well. For us, there are 4 elements that are non-negotiable. First of all, producers' associations must be able to protect their members by filing formal complaints on their behalf for systemic issues. The complaint process must be transparent. The decision and the remediation plan submitted must be made public. Large chains mustn't be able to evade the complaint and the dispute resolution process in any way. And no later than September 2027, a report must be made public summarizing the first 18 months of the code's implementation and the progress made in improving relations between large chains and their primary suppliers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for an opportunity to appear here today. I speak to you as the CEO of Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada, and also in my role as Chair of the Board of the Office of the Grocery Code of Conduct. Over the past 9 years with FHCP, I've been a consistent advocate for the creation of a grocery code. I've dedicated time and energy to advancing this work, from serving on the original steering committee, helping lead the development of the actual code, to supporting its governance as part of the Board of Directors. It's been a long and complex process. It's been 4 years since the federal government publicly backed the need for a code, and throughout that time we've appreciated the support of multiple ministers of agriculture and their provincial counterparts. And I also want to thank this committee for its steady backing, which has been key to helping move this initiative forward. Let me be clear about what we've accomplished and what remains. We have successfully established the office and appointed an exceptional leader, Karen Proud, as our first Code Office President and adjudicator. Karen has implemented a meticulous and thorough process laying out stable foundation for the office in a very remarkable and short period of time. The Code of Conduct provisions, the core of this entire initiative, are done. They took 3 years of negotiation, compromise, and collaboration. They represent the heart of the code and set the framework for how suppliers and retailers will engage going forward. Everything else from a governance perspective, the operating rules, bylaws, and the forthcoming dispute resolution process exist to support and enable the code provisions. That's why it's important to view what's left in perspective. We are in the final 5 kilometers of a 40-kilometer run. The heavy lifting has been accomplished. The final piece is the Dispute Resolution Management Process, or DRMP, and discussions in that are ongoing. Importantly, the code itself informs the DRMP, not the other way around. The DRMP cannot be used to rewrite or undermine what has already been agreed upon in the code. I remain confident we will reach a workable conclusion. Our adjudicator, Karen Proud, is actively engaged, and if she determines that the proposed DRMP mechanism equips her to fulfill her responsibilities, and if parties can find agreement, I think we have a clear path forward. The voluntary nature of the code isn't easy. Every stakeholder has to make their own decisions to opt in, and they will do so only if they believe the framework is sound. Perspectives differ sharply. Some large retailers remain skeptical about the need for a code, while the supplier community has been unified in its support. This gap in outlook, compounded by a lack of trust, has made it tempting for some parties to attempt to script solutions for every possible scenario. While the code was designed to be principle-based, there's been pressure to make the DRMP more prescriptive than originally intended. That's where the friction lies now, not in the code itself, but in the dispute process. Despite these challenges, momentum continues to be on our side, with almost 100 companies already registered, and that list continues to grow every day. That sends a strong signal of confidence from across the stakeholder base. We've worked together to complete the most difficult part, the Code of Conduct provisions themselves. I'm encouraged by the progress that we've made and confident that with more balanced and pragmatic approach to finalizing the DRMP, we can take this final step. If we stay focused and collaborative, I believe we will be ready to implement the code by January 2026 and begin delivering the positive change the industry needs. And thank you for your time and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go to the Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada online. Sir, 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee for studying this issue, which is very important for our industry.
And I am Executive Director of the Fruit Vegetable Growers of Canada. Through our 80-plus members, FVGC represents growers across the country, producing more than 120 different crops on over 14,000 farms. My comments will focus on a fundamental flaw in the design of the Grocery Code of Conduct and offer what we believe is a simple and practical solution. But let me begin by stating the obvious. Growers want a fair, competitive, and transparent marketplace. And in theory, the Grocery Code of Conduct and the office that administers it represent an important step toward that goal. In practice, however, it may be another matter. The problem is simple. The code's dispute resolution architecture relies on individual suppliers bringing individual complaints about retailer conduct. On its face, this may look reasonable. In practice, however, it may be unworkable. Canada's grocery supply chain is vast and complex. Many of the practices deemed problematic by the growers we represent are systemic, affecting dozens or hundreds of growers at once. Yet, the current process asks each grower, one at a time, to invest scarce time and money to bring a complaint, and to do so, as my colleagues from APMQ mentioned, under the shadow of potential commercial retaliation. Two fundamental factors not addressed in the design phase make the current model problematic. The first is capacity, and let's start with growers. Most growers do not have legal teams to do their research or to represent them. Most growers operate on tight margins and spend more time in the field than they do in the office. In these circumstances, pursuing an individual claim risks being costly and time-consuming. And given the toothless nature of a voluntary code and the fact that it remains unproven, the results risk being hypothetical at best. Now let's look at the office. The office itself is small with few staff and limited resources. If many growers filed one-off claims, it could quickly be overwhelmed. The second factor, and this remains an uncomfortable fact of life given the economic power imbalance that exists, growers fear retaliation. And we believe that that alone will silence complaints and reduce and limit participation. This leads us to the following conclusion. Unless the issues at hand unless the issue at hand is one of commercial survival for a grower, the rational response for most will simply be to go along to get along. If these design flaws remain unaddressed, the result will be either a clogged system or an underused one, each falling well short of Canadians' expectations and the expectations of this committee and of Parliament at the time of the inception of the code 2 years ago. The practical fix is straightforward. Allow credible producer associations to file representative systemic complaints on behalf of affected members. Think of it like a kind of class action suit. Associations can aggregate and anonymize data, present patterns instead of anecdotes, and bear some of the legal investigative costs that an individual grower cannot. This reduces the risk to growers, improves evidence quality, and lets the office, and this is important given the current business model, lets the office triage and investigate a manageable number of high-value systemic cases rather than hundreds potentially of small repetitive ones. Representative complaints are not a radical idea. They are a pragmatic design choice that would align the code's operational model with the realities of scale and market power. They also create efficiencies, fewer files, richer evidence, and remedies that can apply across a class of suppliers rather than to a single grower or a single farm. Our ask of this committee is simple. Support changes to the code's operating rules and bylaws to explicitly allow registered producer association to bring representative complaints under clear governance and verification rules to be developed. If we want the code to be more than a public relations instrument, if we want it to actually protect growers and improve supply chain predictability, transparency, and fair dealing, we must match its procedures and operating requirements to the on-the-ground realities.
Okay, sir, I'm going to have to stop you there. You're over 5 minutes. Thank you very much. We'll go to the Conservatives for 5 minutes. And Mr. Epp for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all three parties for appearing here today. I'm going to begin with the Association de Producteurs Maraîchers du Québec, and I'm working on my French. So, as I listened to your testimony, I heard in my mind, relative to the code, two different issues. Those that I think that the code was designed to address, where there's a contract in place and breaches of that contract, fines that were not addressed in the contract, things like that, listing fees that were not addressed in the contract, and the negotiation of the contract itself, whether that provided a fair return or not. My understanding is that the code is not designed to provide a fair return to producers. As much as coming from producers, I'd like to see that. But that is not the goal of the code. It's to address the other after an agreement's in place, violations or of that agreement. Would you agree with that?
Oui, tout à fait.
Indeed. The objective of the code is not to get in between, a contractual relationship between a major chain and a vegetable farmer when there is a question of money, or rather the value of the product that is sold. We have nothing to do with that, as Ms. Proud mentioned earlier. However, there are examples, such as the one that Catherine brought up. A major chain might ask for, some prices 2 years ahead of time and to reveal confidential information. These issues should be addressed by the code. In these situations, there's a systemic issue. All Canadian potato farmers or carrot or onion farmers would be implicated in order to prevent what Mr. Bergamini was saying, in order to make sure that we don't have that the association is not, flooded with requests. Then they should be able to take in requests.
Notwithstanding what the code is designed, the reports that I'm getting from both small producers, from $100+ million companies and large producers, again, in the hundreds of millions of dollars, is that the behavior of the retailers, quite frankly, has gotten worse in the last 6 months with respect to fines, with respect to those things, as they is the allegation is, I've heard, and I'm not stating that that is representative of the industry. So that's my question to you. Is that representative that they are pre-positioning themselves for going forward? What are you hearing on behalf of your members?
The conditions that we're experiencing right now aren't the greatest. I think there are other issues that are driving it. If you'll remember back to the affordability issues, the retailers kind of wore it on the chest in regards to being implicated as the biggest drivers of that. And I think the retailers are working very hard to protect themselves from that happening again. Again, I don't think anything that gets laid out today is grandfathered once the code is implemented. The code takes over at that particular point in time, and if those issues continue to exist, then the code is designed there to hopefully have an adjustment in those behaviors.
Thank you. A question to Mr. Bergamini, FVGC. The testimony we heard from Ms. Proud in the first hour was that there is a role for the associations, for the groups to bring those systemic complaints, and I think our friends from Quebec brought that too, that there is that role. What is your confidence then, as has been in other countries, that some of those systemic complaints, some of those broad behaviors are addressed through that office and are addressed through, as was testified, name and shame, or that whole process? Obviously, name and shame is the last resort, but the discussions within the industry.
So our understanding is that the role as it is envisaged now is really to be an advocate for the interests of the members in a very discreet fashion. What we're looking for is a formal role for the representative associations to actually, in the aggregate, identify systemic issues and bring them forward in the formal process, in the formal adjudication process. We believe that is an absolutely essential step that needs to be taken. That needs to be formalized, and we're not satisfied with the current design.
I hear you, and I'm cognizant of the path that the UK and Australia had to take. And I'll go back to a question from the first hour. What has to happen for the code to remain voluntary in Canada? I'll ask Mr. Graydon to begin with that.
I think compliance. And I think one of the deterrents to not being compliant is a regulated code. And you fundamentally lose control over the ability to change it, adjust it. You lose your governance. So I think it behooves the industry to be compliant. And I think that is the biggest thing that we have going for us.
To our friends from Quebec, same question.
Je pense, Monsieur Epp, qu'il faut...
Mr. Epp, I think that we have to try out the code. We've had 18 months to demonstrate that each party was acting in good faith and that each of them wanted to improve the business relationship. So let's try it out for 18 months. And we'll see if the industry can actually, govern itself. Otherwise, the parliamentarians can decide, just as it was decided in Australia, to make the code mandatory. In the EU, about 15 practices were forbidden, and that is included in all of the regulations across of the countries that are part of the EU. So if the EU can find a consensus, then Canadian provinces and territories should also be able to find common ground. If the voluntary nature of the Code of Conduct can't remedy that.
To the Liberals for 6 minutes, MP Chatel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I believe that there is an agreement among ourselves here. Canadians want a code of conduct, and they want it in January. We're optimistic it won't be perfect, and we can give it a shot for 18 months, and then we can course correct when we see how it's going. I'm very pleased to hear that from you. I, over the course of my career, worked on arbitration clauses. Usually, dispute resolution processes mean that there is a disagreement and that there are two parties. That's how it works. It works that way in Australia. and in the UK. We've heard Ms. Proud say that she has the naming and shaming as a leverage. The report that she will draft after those 18 months will be very important. Of course, we will have her back here, and we have invited her before. She does have a power of persuasion. She said earlier that she will listen to systemic complaints and she will work with the associations, and that is her role. It's a role that is kind of like an ombudsman role. There have been anonymous complaints, and I've heard these complaints, and my heart goes out to them. Of course, they are allowed to make anonymous complaints. Ms. Proud should also receive those complaints, and when those complaints become systemic, then that should also be something that is considered in her report. But with regards to arbitration and the dispute resolution process, I don't think it should be denatured. We're talking about a disagreement here. What I'd like to hear is if you're satisfied of the opportunity the associations had. In the clause, it says that the retailer or the supply or the farmer can be represented by you, and you can accompany them. We said that the process should be streamlined. Does that reassure you? Will that help you make progress in your negotiation and deliver a code of conduct in January? The question is for Ms. Lefebvre and Mr. Bourgoin. Yes, we are reassured, particularly for the dispute resolution process that is informal. That means that an association can contact Ms. Proud and say, this situation has been brought up and we need you to step in. When there is a formal process, however, with the current state of things in Quebec, no farmer will dare make a formal complaint that is not anonymous because they are scared. Unfortunately, the examples that Ms. Lefebvre outlined earlier are just a drop in the bucket of what's happened over the last 6 months. The Code of Conduct was supposed to be implemented in June. Those incidents should no longer be happening. Earlier, we gave an example of the increase of fees and that they've almost doubled. In a conference call, 30 members agreed that I represent them with regards directly to the chain. And during the second call, there are only 8 of them left. So imagine what went through their minds. 30 members accepted that I actually represent them in this complaint, and then only 8 decided to continue with the complaint. But with arbitration, there needs to be a disagreement, and that disagreement needs to be solved in a practical manner. It's not about policy. It's really about what can be done in practice. If we reopen the Code of Conduct, because we're not talking about arbitration anymore, we're talking about collective arbitration or extending the definition of parties in the Code of Conduct in order to include associations. Right now, the definition of parties or stakeholders is a retailer or a supplier. So you're asking that we review the Code of Conduct in order to include a clause that would talk about the disagreements that would be deemed systemic by associations, for the complaints to be able to be filed anonymously, and for the role of arbitration, or the formal role would not be would be to arbitrate on systemic behaviors. Perhaps we can take that direction if no one makes a complaint. But you are receiving complaints, and then we would see that it's not working and we can go forward. But I would caution you to, when you're redefining what, in my opinion, this was not actually intended by the clause. May I? I have something to add. Today, we're here representing the fruit and vegetable growers in Quebec. Throughout the Grocery Store Code of Conduct, I represented the fruit and vegetable growers of Canada at the technical committee. Today, there are no minutes of our meetings, and it was always clear that I was representing them. Mr. Perron, for 6 minutes. I'll let you finish your sentence. At the technical committee, I participated in multiple meetings, and it was clear that the associations would have a role to play. Now there are some bylaws of the Code of Conduct, and they are clear, and everybody agrees with them at the administration. The DRMP is being discussed, as Ms. Proud said. Within this dispute resolution process, we can agree on certain principles where businesses who are members, were members of the code, can file a complaint. They will know, Ms. Proud will know the name of this business, and there can be a delegation of people when there is a systemic issue, and the associations can speak on behalf of those companies, or members, rather. There is a value added here. Mr. Bergamini said that there are about 80 horticultural organizations that represent thousands of companies that do business with the major chains. So imagine 1,000 companies that are all filing complaint on the same topic at this dispute process. Wouldn't be possible to fix that problem with just a few people. That is why the association's role is crucial. They will be able to coordinate that complaint request in order to streamline the process. Thank you, Mr. Bourgoin. What you're saying is quite concerning. It's being discussed, and Ms. Proud said earlier that it is normal that the final draft is being questioned. But do you think that what you're saying is one of the issues that's stopping the major chains to opt in? I don't know, because I haven't discussed with their representatives directly, except for those who were present at the technical committee. The representatives of the major chains have their own questions. At this stage, it is normal that everybody has some questions. We do have to be able to speak openly about them. I agree with you, Ms. Chatel. We have to find common ground. But I must insist, small vegetable and farmer growers, vegetable and fruit growers across Canada do not have the negotiating power that the 5 major chains have. I think that's clear for everybody, and what we want is to find a balance. Mr. Bergamini, I imagine that you agree. If I understood your opening remarks, you think that there should be a permit. An association should be able to represent its members during a dispute resolution process. Not only should it be permitted, but it should be essential that this be included in the Code of Conduct. In our opinion, there is a major issue here. We risk not having any participation on the farmers' behalf due to the current situation. If you want the Code of Conduct to be efficient, then you have to target the financial imbalance. The major companies have more power than the family-run businesses. The way the Code of Conduct has been designed, it does not address this imbalance. If we want that fruit and vegetable farmers to participate, then we have to acknowledge that imbalance. Thank you, Mr. Bergamini. Mr. Graydon, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well. Do you think that vegetable farmers are making sense?
Sorry to be a contrarian to my fellow witnesses, but I think we have to be very, very careful in regards to the role of associations. I think there is a tremendous role to play. And I think the systemic issues working directly with the adjudicator, providing information and support to her to investigate and have those conversations is important. If we start to formalize it, then I think we start going down a very slippery slope in regards to confidentiality and some of those other components.
Merci, mais justement,
Thank you. Confidentiality is easy to maintain if they are represented by an association. That seems pretty logical to me. Here's what concerns me. The practices over the last 6 months, I really have a hard time understanding how, we've been working on this code of conduct for a very long time at this committee. We've worked hard on it. People know what the issues are. We're at the point of implementing it. We were going to implement it in June, and now, I don't want to accuse anybody, but it looks like there's some bad faith here. How do you interpret this? Is my time over? Quickly.
Another 20 seconds. Okay.
It is really unfortunate with regards to the conditions of the current environment, but the code has not been implemented yet. And so I think we have to make judgment once the code is enforceable and in place, rather than the behavior of the retailers and or manufacturers at the particular juncture now, because it is not in place. And I can tell you from the discussions that we've had with the retailers, they have come to the table with a genuine interest to try to find solutions. So I think we just have to wait, and then 18 months from now, after we've had it fully implemented, that's the time to do our evaluation.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to do a final round, and then we have a few pieces that we need to discuss as a committee. So we'll do 5, 5, and 2.5, and then we'll end there. So I'll go to Mr. Gord for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question est pour Madame Lefebvre.
Thank you. My question is for Ms. Lefebvre. Unfortunately, in my riding, I've seen family farms who were around for over 30, 40 years abdicate, and they close down. They can't, deliver the goods. There's always something going on. Fee changes. Okay, $50 to discharge your shipment. And if and then you have to wait 4 or 5 hours or something. I'm not really worried about farmers because they're very resourceful, but some of them don't but only 1% of the population actually works in this industry to feed the entire population. We are holding them hostage, telling them to deliver the goods, and then they have all these expectations imposed on them. Are we going to hit a wall on how many farmers we do actually have? I think that within 15 years, there will have to be national products implemented just to have any farmers at all in Canada. What do you think? I do think that we are, every week, every month, there are farmers who tell us that they want to leave this industry, which is the most beautiful profession in the world. Nobody works 18 hours a day if they don't have a passion. And the first thing that they love is to be feeding people locally. The chain that, demanded numbers in order to sell 2 years ahead of time opened up a possibility to all other countries to demand that of their farmers. So carrots from China, as we saw in flyers last week, will be competing with our own carrots. Those are not, don't have any restrictions. carrots from China and are maybe have like a $1 minimum salary. I don't think we'll ever be able to compete with other countries. And that's what we're saying, is that we are about to hit that wall. So there's nothing in the code that can help with the actual prices, So it's just about filing complaints. Farmers will make a complaint once, but where do we go from there? The association, we do think that the association will end up representing them. We have already seen that farmers were unable to fill certain expectations, and there will be reprisals. Forbidden practices, for example, paying $2,000 per square foot in order to have shelf space. Can that be forbidden between major chains and retailers? Because that price is paid by the farmer or the consumer at some point. You're completely right. There probably should be other practices that should be forbidden. For example, the intimidation that we've been going through the last few months. What we want is for there to be a mandatory code of conduct in order to be able to protect our member farmers. And we would like to do that from farm to table. A lot of people are, intimidating. And who is really benefiting from all of this? It was said that our production costs are never taken into consideration. And that is really what makes us viable. If our production costs are not covered by the cost of sale, then we can't continue. We will hit that wall, any day now. Are major chains more concerned about their the profits they're generating for shareholders? Well, this year was the worst year since COVID, so there are prices paid to the producer instead of, the producers are not covering their costs with what they were paid.
5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci pour vos témoignages très.
Thank you, and thank you for your interesting witness testimonies. I'd just like to make sure that I understood everything. The Code of Conduct has been drafted, and the wording, it works for you. You're not asking for any changes to the wording. We're rather speaking about how we're going to solve disputes, and that is where there's a disagreement right now. And I see you nodding your heads. So I'll move on to my questions. The Code of Conduct, as it is worded now, questions for all of you. Does the wording address any of the alarming issues that you've brought up? If it does work, should it actually fix the issues that you've brought up, Mr. Bergamini and Ms. Lefebvre? For a certain part of them, yes. But some of them are not contracts that they have between retailers. Yes, a lot of the issues will be solved, but not all of them. And just to add on, the Code of Conduct, as it was drafted, is not perfect, but it is a compromise, and all of the parties have worked very hard to reach a certain consensus. As Mr. Graydon said earlier, there are some next steps. Ms. Proud also mentioned that we have to come to a consensus on how to do the dispute resolution process. When hundreds of hundreds of thousands of Canadian farmers have a systemic issue that is acknowledged by the parties, well, it would be simpler for the associations to be able to speak on their behalf. It is about the efficiency of the system. We have to demonstrate that this system works and that we didn't, work for nothing. 18 months, that's very quick. I completely agree with my colleagues. I'd like to add that in my current role, I don't really see myself promoting the membership of the code to my members because of things that have been brought up this afternoon. We have to demonstrate that there is a rational way forward and a practical one for SMEs so that they can actually benefit from this code, and that's just not the case right now. So I will turn to Mr. Graydon. You are the president of that committee, or the CEO rather. The request that's being made right now is for SMEs to have a certain opportunity. It's a bit of a David versus Goliath situation. We want them to have the opportunity to be represented by their association. Why don't you think it's possible? I feel like there's a bit of reticence. What is it in the wording that does not allow associations represent farmers?
I represent the manufacturers, and the small to medium enterprises in our world are no different. They suffer the same challenges as a small family farm. But I believe that the associations do have a very strong role to play to bring these systemic issues to the forefront in an effort to ensure that they get dealt with before they become problems. And we have modeled this code after the UK. The provisions that we have are very, very similar to the United Kingdom. And I think we also have to look at 15 years worth of experience in the United Kingdom and what could or couldn't happen here. Yes, it is a regulated code there, and it is not here. But I think we have to allow the process to unfold first in regards to seeing the effectiveness of the roles of associations and working with the adjudicator to bring these larger issues to bear. If they continue to be challenges, it becomes a challenge for the retailers as well, because as Ms. Proud indicated, she will write them up and will utilize the tools she has available to her. And I don't think they particularly want that to happen. So I think we have to try to work with them first and see if we can't eliminate some of these systemic issues. I don't agree that we're going to have this tsunami of complaints. I think that, again, is part of the role of the associations to work with our members to try to help them to identify.
I tried to give you a couple of extra seconds there, but I'm going to have to go to Mr. Perron for the final 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Graydon, you say that you don't think there will be more complaints, but if it's a systemic issue that a lot of farmers are experiencing, then it would make the process more efficient if they are represented by their respective associations. You mentioned earlier that it's important for the complaint to remain confidential. The process itself has to be transparent in the end, but it's important that it remain confidential. I think that associations playing their natural role will actually protect the confidentiality. Earlier, you said that you were optimistic. I also am an optimist. I think that we'll get to an agreement, but I don't see anything that could actually that presents an obstacle. On transparency, Mr. Bourgoin, Ms. Lefebvre, Mr. Graydon, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we should move forward. Mr. Perron, you hit the nail on the head. When associations can represent their members, then that demonstrates transparency. It proves that a part of the industry can agree that there is an issue that actually impacts a critical mass of the members here. with regards to transparency, the entire process of the DRMP, while respecting the confidentiality of elements that should only be seen by Ms. Proud, well, we must recognize the complaint, why it was filed, and what the process of dispute resolution is, which includes the Code of Conduct Office's decision. And if there is remediation that is proposed by the president of the Code of Conduct Office, well, that decision must be known by Canadians. The dispute resolution process within a voluntary code, the major chains have to accept it without a single clause that allows them to, opt out, including in their contracts. So nobody who they've had a contract with can say that they've actually agreed to some sort of loophole so to prevent a complaint being filed and heard.
So that concludes this part of the meeting. I wanted to thank the witnesses for joining us here today. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. Thanks. Okay, to committee members, I've got some other business I'd like to just address. We do have a budget for this study. Each of you should have received it. Is everyone okay with the budget? Is there any discussion around this budget? Any discussion? Can I get a motion, I guess, to approve it, or are we just consensus? Everyone's fine? No objection? Okay, fine. Second part, in regards to our scheduling, we did talk last week about the possibility of bringing witnesses, I think, on Thursday for the old study. So we did secure the witnesses. So Thursday's meeting, the first hour would be witnesses? With the minister. The first hour with the minister, second hour with the witnesses for the original study we were doing. Is that okay with everyone still, that we've confirmed the witnesses? Yeah? Any questions? Okay. Yeah, good. Okay. And any other business? Mr. Barlow.
Thanks, Chair. As we discussed before the break, I wanted to try and get a one-meeting study on the spent fowl issue. We sent a motion to everybody's office ahead of time. If there's no concerns, I'd like to move that motion. I don't think I need to read it in the record, but I will if necessary. It seems like we were all in agreement with that before.
Is there any objection? Sorry? It has to be read into the record?
Okay.
We've got to follow the rules. Just the motion part, though, right?
Yeah. Given that the importation of chicken into Canada, mislabeled as spent fowl, has continued for well over a decade. B, at its peak, fraudulent imports of spent fowl cost Canada 1,400 jobs, $105 million in economic contributions, $35 million in taxes, and at least $66 million in government revenues annually. And C, the Government of Canada is committed to addressing the issue of spent fowl in a joint statement on March 20th, 2025 from the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food and the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the fraudulent importation of broiler meat mislabeled as spent fowl and report its findings to the House.
Any discussion? Everyone approve?
Just the deadline for the witnesses.
Oh, deadline for the witnesses.
What was the date?
Next Monday.
Okay, so
the 27th.
This should be pretty easy. So I would say by the end of the day, Wednesday. Should be okay. End of the day, Tuesday. We know who they are. So yeah.
Tuesday, 4 o'clock. What time? Yeah. Is that fine?
4 o'clock tomorrow.
4 p.m. Not a.m.
Yeah.
Is that fine with everyone? Any discussion?
On Thursday, on the agenda.
Okay. So we all approve that? Fine? Okay. Thursday, we have the minister for the first hour. The second hour, we have the witnesses, right?
On the regulatory reforms. Yes.
Regulatory reforms, the original study. Yeah? Okay.
So on Monday, we have on the
Next week. So next week, Monday, spent fowl. Thursday, we go back to our regular study?
That's the question.
I think that's the plan?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, no objections? Mr. Penot?
Ouais, j'ai juste pas bien entendu, là.
I just didn't hear correctly. You said next Monday?
Poules de réforme. Après,
Spent foul, and then back to this study?
That's for, so
Le code de
I'll
conduite.
go through the 3 days. So this Thursday coming up, Minister, first half. Second half, we go to the original regulatory study for 1 hour because we confirm the witnesses. Next week, with the Monday, we do spent foul, and the Thursday, we go back to what we're doing here, the regular study on code of conduct. Is everyone clear? Okay, no objections? A motion to adjourn? Okay, thank you.